Greetings, this is Griff Ruby. We're now working the fourth segment of this interview. And we left off, he was describing how discovering, that there were traditional Catholics who were willing to have him be their priest down in Phelan, and then later on he'd moved them up to Apple Valley. And that had been a very major blessing, the discovery that tradition, at least in the community that he had hooked up with then, did still exist. But there still remained the bigger problems of just the church as a whole. You still had somebody supposedly being pope, promulgating a strange new religion, really, a new mass, you name it. And there's still these bigger problems. And while many writers could very, very wonderfully and competently describe what a terrible fall these things were, but who could hold out any hope? There really wasn't anybody who could give you any hope other than just your own immediate parish there.
You are on your own.
Yeah, and maybe in time you might have learned there were similar groups in other places.
But those people from Phelan, those parishioners from Phelan, followed me for 20 years.
Yeah.
20 full years.
That's an inspiration.
In fact, one whole family from Barstow, they just had the 50th anniversary, and I was the main speaker. And they had nothing but love for me, nothing but I married all their kids and buried their parents and everything else. And I got a lot of laughs because I said this one man, they call him Hoot, but his name is Charles. I said that he had my back for 20 years, and no one dared ever badmouth me. And it's the truth. It's the truth.
But all of that, and people getting married and buried and everything, and sticking with you for 20 years and, or however long, all of that, isn't that that's the church functioning how the church is supposed to function.
Yeah.
That's how it should be. So, but what's needed was, a source of inspiration or something, and I'm hoping maybe, and now we can kind of now we get to my books. And you've been looking at them. You've read pretty much nearly all of the first and a good chunk of the second. And granted, it may be just a first reading or two, but even just on that.
Yeah, it's a book that needs somewhat of a course in study. I mean, you can't just read it fast because you'll miss a lot. There's so much there that's important. And I plan to do that. I plan to keep on reading them.
Yeah, I was told something similar about my resurrection book when
I want to get that too.
One of my correspondents had been a professor who teaches Latin in somewhere in Louisiana. This lady admired my book and she read it, and so she became traditionalist. And in her case, they had an extraordinarily generous indult. But given the generosity of it all, I don't fault her for having gone with that at all. I think I hope it's still good over there. I don't know, but at least at the time, it was a perfectly reasonable decision on her part. But at least she was sticking with tradition, and even managed to arrange for a traditionalist confirmation, which is kind of an unusual thing, especially there. I mean, they'd give you the mass, and maybe if they're really generous, a funeral or even a wedding, but it's a different thing to give you, other sacraments in the traditional forms.
You know that if we had a relative or something in Minnesota, say, that needed to be buried or married, you could not use the Novus Ordo churches. I mean, if it was being buried, you did the service in the cemetery.
Yeah.
But no church would allow a traditional Catholic to perform the sacraments. No church,
Well, so leave them out of the loop. Go on without them, I say. I mean, do the same thing.
You could go to any church or any building and do the sacraments.
Yeah.
But they didn't make it easy they were not accommodating at all.
Yeah. So there was all of that. And then, so you find that there's a lot of good things. And one message I'm hoping is coming through, is a positive message the church still survives. It's a doctrine that is indefectible, and part of that means it can't be made to just stop existing, can't be corrupted. Now, we look at the Vatican organization, that has decayed. There's just no way to call that a Catholic church. It just doesn't make any sense. But that doesn't mean that the Catholic Church doesn't exist. It just means that tradition is what has to be what's carrying on with it. And it also bases very strongly on a very strong motif of visibility in the church. The church is a visible society. Its actions have to be visible, and it judges. It doesn't say whether or not you're in a state of grace or not. It just asks, are you a priest using the appropriate forms? And that is the criteria for, did you do the sacrament? If you are validly a priest and you use the correct manner and form, it is done. And it doesn't matter, whether your own soul is in a state of grace or not.
Maybe that's in the book. If you probably stressed that quite. I got flyers here. Stressed that quite a bit. But isn't that the main reason for the book?
It's visible.
That we would become church.
Yeah.
That we would become the church.
We just are the church. Yeah.
By the way we lived and by the way we preached and everything.
Yeah, but I wouldn't even say become, even that. We just continuously have been.
Suppose we would say become, we are the church.
Yeah.
But the question is, what are we doing about it? Are we making that clear to the people?
That's the thing. We need to make that clear. I think there's a lot of priests, there's some folks some old timers who they did fine, and they didn't seem to be too concerned about what comes after. I mean, I heard things like that of Father Gromer de Pau. There he is way at ground level on this thing, but as it came to the end, it wasn't like there was anybody he saw as being fit to succeed him for his parish. Now, I don't know if they've ever since changed their mind and found somebody, or whether he's just, I'd heard that when he died, they just simply started showing, video recordings of masses, he said, and they would just show up and watch that. And that was church. Now, I don't know how long that situation continued, but you kind of got the idea that he looked down on anybody that wasn't one of the...
How could anyone do what he did?
But and he was there at the beginning, and of course, for that, he deserves unqualified praise. So, but how things came on. So there was that kind of a viewpoint. And then there's others who, they don't know the place of their society, and it's easy to just make an appeal to supplied jurisdiction, because then you don't have to say, well, you're the bishop of the diocese of this or that, because then that means that's where your authority is, and there isn't a regular sized diocese left on the face of the earth that would have enough Catholics to justify a single bishop for all of them.
Yeah. While I was at Apple Valley, and I did a lot of baptisms, but the Catholic Church in San Bernardino, St. Anthony's, every time they would have a confirmation, and if I baptized the child, they sent me the notice that he was going to be confirmed, and they were all good about my baptisms.
Interesting.
There was no anger at all.
They were even taking the courtesy to let you know. Because you have their baptismal records. You started them because when you baptized them, that started their baptismal record. Their records are with you.
Yeah.
And that's what needed to be updated. How very punctilious of them. You have to respect that, okay? Well, good for them. Good on them for that. So that's what I really want to get in. That's why I think if especially our clergy, but I think also just other interested parties have a better understanding of the real place that traditional Catholics have, and the traditional clergy in particular,
the way we carry, the power.
As being the continuation of the church. We're not just some fly-by-night Joe Nobody's coming out of nowhere, putting on our miters and crozers and saying, hi, I'm a Catholic bishop, obey me. They didn't come out of nowhere. Now maybe some particular ones did, that's different. But the ones that really matter, they came from the church, and in accordance with the way the laws of the church can be adapted for circumstances as ours. And that's what I'm really getting down to. So, in the first book, as you've seen, I go through all these different doctrines. I would say about the first 10 are very conspicuously in favor of, showing how the Vatican organization isn't Catholic, doesn't have any of these attributes, characteristics, or marks of the church, and how traditional Catholics fulfill all of these to the greatest extent they can be measured.
Yeah.
So there we are. And then we get to about 11 through maybe 16, 15 or so, where these chapters we're kind of looking at some of the tougher objections that could be raised. And but again, things like, how can you judge a pope and stuff like that? Like that's chapter 14. And it's not something to just ignore. You don't just say, I don't like him, that makes him not a pope. But at the opposite extreme, you can't say, well, I know he's this rank heretic, he's totally destroying the church, and he's leading souls to hell, and he's even doing it knowingly and deliberately, but he is our pope, and we have to stand by, we know that's not right.
Yeah.
But you got to find a balance. You have to find a balance between the two. You have to be able to show, without having to try to, can you just point a finger at him and call him a heretic? How many times have people done that with popes, and who's been right in that? The one pointing the finger or the pope?
Yeah.
So why are we different? But if you have something else, something independent of all that, something that doesn't even really require any blame per se on the individual, just a simple matter of fact, I didn't steal a house, I didn't move in and take over, I just signed a lease. Where you want to see it, there's the signature, there's the lease.
Your books are basically, they take one Pope, Paul VI, and they prove that things are not right. Do they do the same scrutiny of the other popes?
Well, I'm scrutinizing the office. It is my contention, maybe I didn't make that clear enough.
Well,
I hope on further rereadings you can pick this up.
Yeah.
That when Paul VI redefined the nature of the society that he was leading, he was also redefining the nature of the office he was holding. And you can't change the papacy itself. That's established by God.
Yeah.
But what you can do is create, even if accidentally and implicitly, a brand new office in parallel to the existing one of whatever characteristics you see fit to assign to this new office.
Yeah.
So he left the papacy by transfer and peaceful acceptance of same to another different and incompatible office. It is incompatible because this other office, by its very nature, has no jurisdiction over at least some part of the body of Christ. That's a bare brute fact. It doesn't accuse anybody of anything.
Could you explain a little bit how he doesn't have that?
Because part of the mystical body of Christ is doing its subsisting outside the confines of the Vatican organization. It talks about, here's the church, one holy Catholic apostolic. And this church, and then here's the big key phrase, subsists in. He didn't say subsists as. That would have changed everything.
Yeah.
But it said in. And just how different do we mean in? As in, not all of it is inside.
Yeah.
Some of it is not. Some of the mystical body of Christ, one holy Catholic apostolic, bearing the full criteria and charisms of the church, is outside the confines of the Vatican organization, outside the confines of the society headed up by Paul VI as of that definition. So there it is.
This whole thing about subsist.
Yeah.
Ratzinger was very big on that.
Right. He's believed to have had something of a finger in the pie on that. Although apparently the word, and I actually have a detail about this, I'm astonished what I managed to come across at one point, but it turns out that the original drafter of Lumen Gentium, in a much more conservative and truly Catholic form, I'll have to say, was Sebastian Tromp. And they were trying to hammer out this idea of we want to be able to say a little more than simply this is that. We want to say that the church is something eternal. And he says, well, you could say subsists. Now, he wasn't thinking subsists in, like, but it's not the same thing. In fact, when he was introducing that phrase, and it did come out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And into the text, right away, the very next thing is, and this is exclusive, as in, what he really meant to say is subsists as, in no uncertain terms. But they just got the subsists in, the bit about this is exclusive disappears, and suddenly you have something that there is no clear identity. And the whole of the ecumenism thing got its start right in that moment, right there. That's it. And it's so great. I'm glad I didn't have to be the one to say that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm quoting people, but they said it first. I'm just quoting it.
Yeah.
So if you don't have jurisdiction over the whole church, you're not pope, just as any, archbishop, or patriarch of a particular rite isn't pope because he doesn't have jurisdiction over the whole church. It's not an insult to say of a patriarch, hey, you're no pope because there's parts of the church that don't answer to you. And he says, yeah, that's right. Only this rite answers to me, the rest do not. Is there an insult in that? Is there a condemnation in that? There's nothing in that. It's a total matter of fact. So, that's how much that's the extent to which I insist on leaving blame out of my book, no matter how much these characters have earned. Man, and the other sources I listed at the beginning can go into that in great detail, and I say more power to you all. Mm-hmm. But I don't need to add to that. That's been said.
Why did it take so long with Paul VI? Didn't we get enough from him? Didn't we? Why were other people brought to the papacy? Why did John Paul I go to papacy?
Once you get a different office, what happened is the successors were successors in that different office.
Yeah.
So that's it. It doesn't matter who they were or what their inner dispositions might have been or anything else.
Now, John Paul II, did he follow Paul VI?
See, he was Paul VI's successor in this new different office that is incompatible with the papacy. Because you can't have all jurisdiction and not have it. Mm-hmm. So the incompatibility is direct, logical, and intrinsic.
And then when Ratzinger got in there, did they change?
No, he left all that there.
Yeah.
They've all just left that. The only way to change that would be to take Lumen Gentium off the books, or else go in and re-edit it, redraft it, fix it. And they're not going to do that because their whole ecumenistic agenda is based on what it says right now, which is exactly what states that the Vatican leadership does not possess the universal jurisdiction that a pope, by doctrine and definition, always and intrinsically must. So that to me is the absolute proof, yea, verily, proof positive, without even having to say, look what a heretic he is. He's not pope by his own admission. And granted that he's not pope, that he should then enter into heresies and everything else, that's not a surprise to me. And I think some of the hostility he gets is you're expecting him to be a pope and then he doesn't act like one and you get all angry. How dare he? How dare he? How dare he? How mad are you at Billy Graham because he doesn't act like a pope? Well, Billy Graham doesn't, nobody, we all understand he's just a Protestant, right?
Yeah.
Nobody faults him for preaching Protestantism.
Yeah.
He's just doing, what he knows, faulty as it is. And we don't blame him much for that. I mean, sure, it'd be great if he became a Catholic along with everybody else, but, we don't go angrily blaming him because we're not thinking he's the Pope, he should be Catholic, he should only say what's Catholic. He should build up the Catholic Church. We don't expect that of him, so we don't get disappointed and angry at him when he doesn't do it. So I'm not angry or disappointed when the Vatican leaders fail to do what Catholic popes do because they are no more popes than Billy Graham.
And you mean all the popes, all the way up to Francis?
Yeah, all these guys. They're no more popes than Billy Graham. Maybe even arguably less so. I mean, Billy Graham, at least, I think is sincere. But these guys, you know, I don't expect that. I don't expect them to act like popes.
Do you think John Paul the Sixth, realized what he was doing to the church? I mean,
don't know.
it was that a conscious.
Maybe we're gonna have to kind of cut this off and do another one here, because I don't know how long this is.